Space Marines are one of the most feared warriors in the galaxy, able to withstand horrific damage, move at terrifying speeds, survive poisons and toxic environments, and have near-perfect control of their minds and bodies. So, have you ever wondered how to make one? Well, you're in luck, because it just so happens that we got our hands on a recipe from some dusty administratum data stack marked with a big I symbol. It's probably fine. Just take out your quills and parchment and ignore those sirens, because we are likely only going to be able to tell you this once. This is how to make a Space Marine. The process of making a new Astartes warrior starts with recruitment. On many thousands of worlds across the Imperium, Space Marine chapters maintain a population to take in fresh members. These cultures often are kept at a lower technological standard than the rest of the Imperium to both ensure that they are tougher on average and that they are as uneducated as possible. Notable exceptions to this would, of course, be the Ultramarines, who take their recruits from the very well-educated populace of the Ultramar sector. These recruits are selected via rigorous physical, mental, and genetic testing, as well as some sort of ceremonial trial to ensure only the absolute best can make it into the aspirant program. Once a subject has successfully completed these tests and has been approved by the recruitment detail, they are taken to the chapter, often never seeing their families again, meaning that these very young aspirants, anywhere from 8 to 10 years of age, are subjected to tests, have to compete and survive what are frequently dangerous trials, and then leave the only home they've ever known to undertake very risky surgeries and training. So buckle up, because this gets rough. The first 3 phases of transforming aspirants into Astartes typically happen all at once, centered around a group of surgeries, beginning with implanting a secondary heart. This new self-sustaining organ acts as both an emergency backup in case the subject's primary heart is ever damaged or destroyed, but also as a sort of physical boost, as the secondary heart can be used to increase blood flow for extra performance in combat, or even help the Marine keep functioning in low oxygen environments. At the same time, the osmedulla is implanted into the aspirant. This tubular organ injects a growth hormone specially designed to bulk up the subject's bones, increasing their dimensions and density, causing them to literally ossify. It's this organ that is most responsible for making a Space Marine so big. One of the features of this is that the ribcage fuses into one dense plate to act as a shield for all the organs below. This would at first glance seem to be a bad thing, as the human ribcage is meant to be flexible to allow for the inflation of the lungs, but obviously the Emperor found a way around that problem, so let's not think on that too much. As a secondary feature, the osmedulla prepares the subject's bones to absorb a ceramic-based additive that's worked into a Space Marine's diet. So after the implantation process, the aspirant's bones quickly grow and become ultra tough. Going along with the osmedulla's bone growth, the biscopia is the organ responsible for the massive amount of muscle growth needed to support an Astartes body. The circular organ is implanted in the chest along with the secondary heart and immediately begins flooding the aspirant's body with growth hormones, which is of course sped through the body with the aid of the other 2 organs added during the first steps of the process. It is during phase 3 that the Primaris organs are also introduced, typically simultaneously. The easiest is a cybernetic enhancement called the sinew coils. Durametallic cables are added to every tendon and ligament in the subject's body, further increasing the incredible muscular power of the growing Space Marine. Next is the Magnificat, a thumbnail-sized lobe which is added to the aspirant's brain. This organ actually increases the effectiveness of almost every other implant in the Space Marine process, especially the previous 2 phases, causing Primaris Marines to be even larger than their firstborn counterparts. This organ is half of the Godmaker gland that the Emperor used in his creation of the Primarchs, so it's very powerful. We have no idea how Belisarius got his hands on it though. Finally, the Belisarian furnace, an organ that connects both hearts with a gland that manufactures and releases potent combat and regeneration stimulants during times of extreme stress. This further increases a subject's healing abilities, as well as their effectiveness in combat. Phase 4 and 5 are introduced at the same time, starting with the hemastamen. It is very tiny in order to fit into a major branch of the circulatory system and primarily serves to increase the hemoglobin in the subject's blood. This increases the amount of oxygen that can be carried in the blood, boosting stamina and strength, while also making a Marine's blood a very bright red. As an added benefit, the hemastamen is also used to regulate the deluge of hormones from the previous implants, as the subject is now around 12 to 14 years old, and growth of both their muscles and bones has had a year or so to pretty aggressively take effect, not to mention the changes that the Primaris organs have started. The hemastamen just ensures that these organs won't continue to hijack the aspirant's hormones. While it doesn't regulate hormones, the Laraman's organ serves an equally important function to the circulatory system, keeping blood inside the body. It is described as a kidney-shaped organ about the size of a golf ball, which is inserted into the increasingly crowded chest cavity of the aspirant and is connected directly to the circulatory system, just like the hemastamen is. But where that organ increases the production of red blood cells, the Laraman's organ produces special Laraman cells which attach themselves to the subject's white blood cells and act like superplatelets, scabbing over wounds and forming near-instant scar tissue within seconds of contacting air. This is one of the biggest reasons why Marines are so hard to kill, as the Laraman's organ essentially guarantees that an Astartes could never bleed out. At about the age of 14, aspirants begin their first round of brain surgery with the implantation of the calypsian node, a little pea-sized organ which is attached at the back of the brain and affects the subject's relationship to sleep. More specifically, the node changes what happens in the brain when a Marine is deprived of sleep, which often happens while on campaign. When it does, the node activates and begins sleeping smaller parts of the Marine's brain, one after the other, while allowing the warrior to remain awake and aware of their surroundings. Now, it's not perfect. A Space Marine is still human enough to need sleep, but the catalepsian node allows a Marine to function perfectly on just 4 hours of sleep per day, and should they need to, the node makes it possible for them to be able to go as long as 2 weeks without fully sleeping at all. Now, while it's not a phase on its own, it's important to note that this is the same stage in the process that an aspirant begins hypnotherapy. This is a form of mental conditioning that trains the subject's mind to be aware of some of their basic biological functions. In this instance, it allows Marines to be conscious of and control their sleep functions, and so without the hypnotherapy, they could not even be able to make use of the catalepsian node. But this mental conditioning also allows them to make use of other implants later in this process, as well as their metabolism, literally allowing a Space Marine to control how their body reacts to hunger, and in extreme cases, even stop their own hearts from beating. And speaking of metabolism, the next 3 phases mostly deal with what the Marine can ingest and what they get from their food. The first of these is Priomnor, which is a sort of pre-stomach that filters out toxins. This is what lets Marines eat and make use of even rotten or diseased food sources, but it also acts as an isolation chamber should the Marine eat something that they can't handle. At the same time, the omophagia is inserted and attached to the aspirant's primary stomach and brain. Located on the spine behind the stomach, this organ is essentially a lobe of the subject's brain that allows them to gain specific information from the things they eat. Chemical composition, genetic makeup, and, in the case of thinking creatures, recent surface memories. That's right, a Space Marine can do recon by eating an enemy scout. This gruesome ability has led to the rise of flesh-eating and blood-drinking rituals, especially in chapters like the Blood Angels, since it is a legitimately useful way to understand their opponents. Doesn't make it any less creepy, though. Last in this block of surgeries is the multi-lung, which is added into the aspirant's chest cavity while the apothecaries have it open to insert the last 2 organs. As you could probably guess by now, this lung is an upgrade to the aspirant's pulmonary system that allows them to breathe in low oxygen and poisoned environments, but it also allows for some limited breathing capacity in water as well. Whenever a hostile atmosphere is detected, a sphincter closes off the Marine's natural lungs and the multi-lung takes over, which is pretty handy. It should be noted that at this point, the aspirant is about 14 to 16 years old, and these years of their life specifically is absolutely filled with more surgeries, meaning that quite often these warriors will have an extended leave from scout or neophyte duties while they recover from this series of extremely invasive procedures. Case in point, the oculobe, yet another brain surgery. This one allowing the aspirant's eyes to accept several adjustments and therapies that take their eyesight from human standard to truly spectacular. Using this implant, chapter apothecaries are able to inject growth hormones into the eye in specific ways that enhance detail and distance of vision. They also are able to edit the retinal cells to accept lower levels of light, meaning that the subject will be able to see perfectly well in the dark once their eyes heal, of course. This also requires more hypnotherapy to allow the aspirants to control their eyes in ways that average humans cannot, making full use of the changes granted by this new organ. Similarly, the liman's ear allows a Marine to filter out or enhance specific sounds, which is yet another thing hypnotherapy allows an aspirant to control. And as you might imagine, the entire inner ear is enhanced, making the subject immune to dizziness or motion sickness, which is great considering that Marines are prone to making atmospheric drops, using jump packs, and leaping out of thunderhawks. Yet another organ that would be useless without hypnotherapy and other chemical procedures, the Suzanne membrane is regardless probably one of the most unique organs given to a new Marine. Inserted above the brain, the membrane eventually merges with the entire cavity and has only one very important purpose: to save the Marine's life. When a Space Marine is hit with an extreme amount of damage or finds themselves in an unsurvivable environment, the Suzanne membrane is activated, either manually or automatically. This triggers a physiological process that causes the subject to begin secreting a waxy fluid that coats the whole body using the muconoid organ that is inserted in phase 16 and puts the rest of the Marine's biological functions into suspended animation in the hopes that they might be found and revived later. It is a very Hail Mary sort of option, but it has saved many lives. The longest ever recorded is Brother Silas Eyre of the Dark Angels, who was found and revived after 567 years in a Suzanne coma. As you might expect from the name, the melanchromic organ controls the amount of melanin in an aspirant's skin, allowing it to lighten or darken in response to levels of radiation, UV or otherwise. Famously, this is the organ that has a unique reaction to the environmental conditions of Nocturne, the home planet of the Salamanders chapter, causing every Salamander's recruit to have extremely darkened skin. Towards the end of their 16th year, aspirants are given another round of multiple surgeries, this time 2 organs that will allow them to handle poisons. The oolitic kidney is an organ that actually works in tandem with the secondary heart rather than the subject's natural kidneys. When a Marine is infected by an extremely effective poison, the oolitic kidney is activated and begins using the secondary heart to filter the subject's blood at high speed. This renders even a Space Marine unconscious, as the intense speed of the circulation of the entire circulatory system would at the very least give them the worst migraine known to humanity. And to cap off the aspirant's toxin screening and identification systems, the neuroglottis is added at the same time as this new kidney. It works in conjunction with several other organs in this system to allow a Marine to identify chemicals and other biological markers by just tasting something. Admittedly, less invasive than eating it, but we imagine that it's not as accurate or complete a source of information. It's around this time that the muconoid is implanted under the skin. We mentioned this organ earlier as something that the Suzanne membrane makes use of when putting an injured Marine into suspended animation, but it has other uses as well. When exposed to extreme heat or cold, and especially the vacuum of space, the muconoid coats any exposed skin to provide some layer of protection for the subject. Very handy, although it has to be activated by external chemical stimuli when not being used by the Suzanne membrane, and the waxy coating must be a real pain to wash off. Sometime around the aspirant's 17th birthday, they are given the last incidental upgrade to their biological weaponry. This is the Becher's gland. 2 small organs implanted into their lower lip or next to their salivary glands, which allows the aspirant to spit a blinding poison which they themselves are now immune to thanks to all of their other supporting organs. This poison is also slightly corrosive, allowing a Marine to be able to melt certain metals given enough time, useful if they're ever captured. But other than that, this organ is not particularly useful in most cases, which has led to its degradation in some chapters. Most notably, the Black Templars, who have completely lost the ability to use it. Probably the most important organ to be given to new recruits, the progenoid glands ensure the future of the chapter. 2 small glands are inserted, one in the neck and one in the chest cavity. They will then absorb genetic material from all of the new implanted organs, and over the course of the next 10 years, they will grow into a pair of organs referred to as gene seed. These are what allows a chapter to grow all the other implants and organs for the next batch of recruits, and are specific to the genetic heritage of the chapter. For this reason, it is the responsibility of every Space Marine to protect and recover gene seed from any fallen Astartes warriors they come across, even if they are from another chapter. To not do so is to doom an Astartes force to a slow death. Finally, as the aspirant approaches their 18th year, the last invasive procedure is undertaken, and it is probably the most dangerous one of the whole process. It is called the Black Carapace, and it is what allows a Space Marine to interface with their suits of power armor. But that means that the process is very intense. Sheets of what appears to be black plastic are inserted underneath the skin, meaning that the aspirant must be partially flayed for this procedure. Once added, the outside hardens, forming yet another protective barrier, while the underside grows neural tendrils that connect directly with specific nerve clusters in the subject's body. Once the aspirant heals and the carapace has had time to grow, plugs are added to their skin, which attach to specific points on the carapace and allow for the Marine to directly hook up to their armor, but also vehicles and other Imperial machinery that's designed with this link in mind. The results of this procedure are that a Marine can operate all of these things like they were a part of their own body, further increasing their effectiveness. Lastly, there are a couple of special treatments given to new recruits of specific chapters, and one to established battle brothers. If you happen to be inducted into the Space Wolves, the very first step is to drink the Canis Helix, a chemical compound derived from the chapter's gene seed. This prepares a wolf aspirant's body for the unique mutations of that chapter: enhanced senses, sharpened canines, and tougher skin, not to mention a ferocity that makes them such effective warriors. It, of course, comes at the cost of potentially transforming into a feral wolfen, but that's the risk of being a space wolf. Similarly, at the very end of the surgical process, Blood Angels recruits must take the rite of insanguination, drinking the gene seed of their Primarch Sanguinius directly. The recruit then falls into a year-long coma where they are placed into a casket and injected with blood from the Primarch as well. Many don't survive the trial or wake up too early and go insane from the claustrophobic experience. And finally, there is one last procedure, done not to new recruits but to seasoned veterans. It's referred to as crossing the Rubicon Primaris. In the cases where a firstborn Marine would elect to become a Primaris Marine, they must have the 3 implants from that process placed inside them. The problem, of course, is that they are meant to be given to much younger people who are still in the process of growing. Adding them to the body of a fully developed Space Marine is no easy feat that involves allowing them to die on the operating table just long enough for the Magnificat to begin stimulating growth to the other organs. After that, they are resuscitated in the hopes of activating their new Belisarian furnace, but many do not survive this process. It's said that out of a population of 1 billion people, there might only be 10 viable recruits to begin with, and only about 15% of those might survive the surgeries. The Imperium of the 42nd millennium is home to trillions and trillions of humans, of course, and so the numbers support the amount of Space Marines flying around, but it's still wild to think about just how difficult it is to become one of these transhuman demigods. And as we mentioned, the surgeries themselves are not the whole picture, with trials, therapies, and warfighting happening the whole time, not to mention that every chapter has their own way of going about all this. Tell us which chapter you'd want to be a part of in the comments below, and then ensure you've liked and subscribed. The chaplains tell us it's important for new Marines to always be prepared with more lore.